Yeah, well, in my new book, I have a chapter, which is Rule 11. Do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. It's kind of the evil triad as far as I've been able to determine. Resentment in particular. It's bad. It's a bad emotion. It's useful. You can learn a lot by noticing that it occurs. Resentment tells you one of two things. One is that that someone's treading on your territory and something needs to be done about it, or that you need to grow the hell up and stop complaining. And it's hard. It isn't necessarily obvious when you feel resentful which of those it is, but you need to figure it out, because you can harbor resentment for unlived life for a very, very long period of time. And all it does is corrupt you. It hurts you. It hurts you physically because it's a stressful emotion. Anger is a stressful emotion. Because your body hyper prepares for action if you're angry, because you might get into conflict. And that's a dangerous situation. And so you burn off a lot of psychophysiological resources in anger. If you're resentful, there's probably something you need to say. There's certainly something you need to figure out. And so you can use it as a guide to further development. It's very much useful to aim at a resentment-free existence. And that means, I suppose, that you're taking up enough space. There's always a struggle between your domain and the domain of other people. Everyone competes for everyone else's attention. Everyone competes for everyone else's time. You compete for your own time. And if you're resentful, it's highly probable that, well, as I said, either you're not standing up for yourself sufficiently, or someone is legitimately on your case, in which case you need to do something about that. Or, live with the consequences, which is very unpleasant. It's not optimal. Sometimes I suppose it's unavoidable, but generally there's something that can be done about it. Some things, if you don't address them, they just get worse. And I've been able to see where things are going to go. It's kind of like what I mentioned to you earlier, that if I watch someone, I can generally figure out what they're up to. I also can see where things are going. And so, if I walk into someone's house and there are things out of order in a particular way, if I pay attention to that, that's often indicative of something not right in the relationship. Maybe the kitchen's a mess. It's like there's food that isn't fresh in the fridge, for example, or there's packages up in shelves that haven't been opened for like 2 years, or since the wedding, let's say. That's too much chaos in the kitchen. Something's wrong. Well, what's wrong? Well, there's something wrong in the domestic relationship there. The bargaining about who does what in the kitchen hasn't been fought through. And so you have to have those fights to put things in order. And if you don't, then you end up with a worse fight in the future. And so the reason that I call things out, as far as I can tell, the positive reason, who knows what the negative reasons are, is because I don't want more conflict. I'd rather have genuine peace, which is very, very, very hard to obtain. People generally obtain peace by sweeping things under the carpet. I have another chapter in this new book called Don't Hide Things in the Fog. And that's what it concentrates on, is pay attention to your negative emotions. Resentment particularly, it's so informative. You find out where you're immature. Well, do you want to? Probably not. Who wants to find out that? Or you'll find out who's oppressing you. And maybe then you can learn to stand up for yourself. Dostoevsky, I think, said something like, every man is responsible for everything that happens to him and everything that happens to everyone else. And that's, it's a crazy statement, right? It's a crazy statement. And he was a pretty extreme person in many, many ways. But there's a level at which that's metaphysically true. because what happens is that it's failure to act often that's the most catastrophic. It's to not do the right thing when the situation presents itself, and it's very specific. You're constantly in situations where you could do the right thing if you were willing to take a risk that's actually of relatively moderate size, and you know that you could take the risk, and you know that you should take the risk, and you don't. And that happens to people all the time. And then what happens is the thing that they didn't oppose grows a little bit, and they shrink a little bit, and that starts a loop, hey? And you say, well, how do you take responsibility for the world? And the answer is, well, you also have to do it with a certain degree of humility, because what do you know? And this is part of the reason that I'm so opposed to the activist culture on college campuses. You don't teach 18-year-olds to go and demonstrate about capitalism, because they don't know anything, and they have problems in their own life that need to be solved that are local. And the local problems aren't trivial, they're not disciplined. They're not looking at the world in a straight way. They're not taking responsibility for themselves or for their actions, their sexual actions, among others. They're not taking responsibility for their family. They're not looking at how they could contribute to the community. They don't understand the fact that they don't know anything. And so they should be taught to start locally and to put things together that they could put together. To make their bed and to clean up their room and to attend their classes with regularity if they're going to university, because that's part of the implicit contract, and to straighten up the things around them that are actually within their power to straighten up. And then what happens is that if you do that, let's say religiously, which I suppose would be the same as in a disciplined manner, that your realm of influence starts to grow, but it grows in a positive way, just like you can end up in hell one step at a time, and that's extraordinarily well documented. You can end up at the opposite place of that one step at a time, but it's also that same gradual process. You don't get to leap from being a 17-year-old knothead who doesn't know anything and who isn't disciplined to the critic of Judeo-Christian society. You just don't know enough to do that, especially when you can look at your own life and think about how many things that you're doing that you know are wrong, that you could fix, that you aren't fixing. And that's the crucial thing. This mode of thinking isn't asking people to stretch themselves beyond what they're capable of. It's just asking them to stretch themselves to the point that they are capable of and seeing what happens. And that works. It works. I've had many people write me over the last year, and this is a great thing, really, it's a great thing, who said that they started to tell the truth, or at least not to lie. Because who can tell the truth, right? But at least you can not lie. And that they started to put things in order around them that they could put in order, and that, the positive things just started to happen like mad. And they're not nihilistic, and they've got a purpose in their life. And so, thank God for that. And it does work. You are the center of the world. As center of the world. It has many centers. And you do partake in this process of casting the potential of the future into the reality of the present and the past. That's what your consciousness does. And the quality of what you produce is dependent on the ethics of your choice. Your choice between good and evil in every moment is what determines the course of the world. And that's on you. It's like, well, that's deeply meaningful, but it's unbelievable. It's ultimate responsibility in the literal sense. And I think that in order for us to set things right, we have to understand that we have to take on that burden of ultimate responsibility as if it's not only as if it's ours, which it is, but as if there isn't anything better that we could do. And one of the things that I found so gratifying about the lecture tour that I've been doing is that, and why I keep doing it, the live events in particular, because we've done about 100 of them now so far, is that when I explain to the audiences, and this is especially true, seems to be especially true of men, but of young men, but not so young even, to say, look, you have an ethical obligation to lift the heaviest load you can possibly conceive of, and that's the primary call to adventure in life. And that call to adventure is so worthwhile that it justifies the particularity. Everybody, it's like lights go on. They think, oh, I see. So you need a meaning to set against the suffering and to protect you against that temptation towards malevolence. You need that. Well, where's the meaning to be found? Well, it's not happiness. It's not short-term pleasure. It's not self-development. It's not self-esteem. It's none of those things that are so focused on the individual psyche even. Yeah. It's literally the stumbling uphill towards the city of God with your burden. And people go, well, that's where the meaning is, and they know that because they know responsible people. They know they admire responsible people. They already got that. Say, well, that's what you should become. And they think, and not only that, that's what you could become because that's what you are in the deepest sense. Yes.
What do you think of the skills that people should start to develop in their 20s in general to make them better human beings, more potentially open to success financially, relationship, health-wise? What are 2 or 3 things that everyone should focus on in their 20s?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt to be in good physical condition, so we can walk through it. Stop drinking too much. How do you know if you're drinking too much? You regret what you do when you're drinking. It's interfering with other important goals. It's causing you financial distress. It's getting you in trouble with your friends or your family. It's getting you in trouble with the police. Okay, so stop abusing substances if you can, right? If you see that they're hurting you. And alcohol is particularly pernicious in that regard. So, physical health. Are you in decent shape? Are you strong and coordinated? And if you're not, well, you'd be better if you were. You'd feel better, you'd be more effective, you'd live longer, you'd be less sick. And you really see that mount up. Like if someone's been in shape once in their life, they age way better. And it's also a really good way of maintaining your cognitive ability. Like, you hear about those exercises that you can do online to make you smarter and keep your cognitive ability intact. Yep. Those don't work. There's no evidence that they work. People keep saying that they make you smarter, they maintain your cognitive function. Psychologists have studied that for 50 years, hoping that one of those things will work. Trying all sorts of creative tacks, they don't work. Exercise works. Cardiovascular and weightlifting, you start to decline in your fluid intelligence at about the age of 25. And it's a linear trend downhill, and it can accelerate as you get older. It's just like this, quite ugly. If you exercise, you stave that off. So that's really useful. Maintain your relationships and foster them. So when I look at successful people, they're really good at something. They're reliable, right? You can count on their word. They're generous, and they have a wide connection network, which becomes more and more valuable as you get older. Yeah. So it's one advantage that older people really have over younger people. They have a connection network, and a connection network is
huge.
Well, you could be connected to 1,000 well-connected people. Okay, that means you are connected to the entire world. Right, it's unbelievably valuable. And that's one of the things that's so absolutely remarkable about the situation that I'm in right now. As far as one of the great benefits is I can contact pretty much anybody and they'll talk to me. It's like, really? That's so cool. I'm interested in infrastructure for reasons I won't get into, but I'm interested in infrastructure development. I think it's a good method of wealth transfer. It's a good solution to the problem of inequality and employment. I reached out to a leading expert on infrastructure last week to see if he'd talk to me. I thought, I don't know anything about infrastructure except that it's worn to a frazzle and we should do something about it. He agreed to talk. And having a connection network is of inestimable value.
It's huge.
Reliability, generosity, you can work on both of those. Philosophical sophistication, it's very useful. because it orients you properly. You have a sophisticated sense of the world. You find, for example, that doing things for other people is actually more rewarding than virtually anything else you can do. You know, when you hear you should be of service to other people. Well, if you actually watch yourself, you pay attention to yourself and you do something that helps someone else and it genuinely helps them, I defy you to find another experience that is that satisfying. It's actually quite stunning how satisfying that is. And so that's a very useful thing to realize.
Why is that such a satisfying thing for human beings?
There's no better life strategy. I mean, imagine, I could give you a quick sort of technical example. So imagine I take two people and I say, okay, I'm going to give you $100 and you have to give some of it to the person right beside you. And they can either agree or disagree with the split, but if they disagree, you don't get anything. Okay, so a classical economist would say that the person should take the 100, offer the person next to them $1, and the person should accept it because why not? They get $1 instead of nothing. And that's the solution. But what happens is that if you don't offer that other person something close to 50-50, they're likely to tell you to go to hell. Yes, yeah. Very.
And then you get nothing.
You get nothing too. You think, well, why would people do that? Because they just reject $50 and who cares? And the answer is, well, we don't just play one game with other people. We play a repeating game. And so imagine we did this. So imagine it's a crowd and they're all watching you. And I offer you $100 and you have to share it with the person next to you. And you say, would you like to take $70? And the person says, well, I'm not sure that's fair to you, but if it's okay, yes. But then everyone else sees that. And now they all have an opportunity to pick who they're going to play with next. Well, you're not going to get picked last, are you? Remember what you told me? You didn't want to get picked last, right?
I did not.
Okay, so what you did was you turned yourself into an athlete.
A machine.
Okay.
That was always going to get first.
Okay, great. So, but imagine we expand that game.
Yes.
And we say, you want to be the person that everyone wants to play with.
Yep.
Well, then all you have in your whole life is invitations to play. Well, how are you going to be that person? Be productive, straightforward, generous.
Make everyone else better around you, and they're going to want to play with you.
Absolutely. So there you go. And then you get to play.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how is that not the best possible deal? It's clearly. See, so the if the ethical argument is put properly, it is by far the most compelling argument. It's like if you want to have everything you could possibly want and more, then be a good person. The better a person you are, the more likely that is to happen. That doesn't mean that you're completely protected against getting cut off at the knees. But there's no better strategy.
That's it.
And you can even think about it selfishly. And I talk about this to some degree in Beyond Order. Let's say that you want to be selfish. You think that's the best possible strategy. Mm-hmm. Why should I care about others? Okay, let's say you should only act in your own best interest. Well, then it's like, well, what's your best interest? Well, what does interest mean and what does you mean? What's in your best interest? Your best interest. 3 mysteries. What's best, what's interest? Okay. Well, there's you. But you aren't just you right now. You're you, and you tomorrow, and you next week, and you next month, and you in 5 years, and you in 10 years, and you when you're a pensioner. You're a community of selves stretched across time. And so if you were enlightened and selfish, you would act in a manner that would benefit that entire community across time. And I don't think that's any different than acting on the best possible part for other people. I think they're the same problem. So I think as soon as human beings discovered the future, we were no longer singular individuals. We're instantly each a community. And then the community ethic prevails. And the community ethic is, I want to win in a way that makes you win. That's the best possible victory. Jocko was telling me when we talked this week, he's this tough character, man. You know, and he could have, and I'm not telling tales out of school here, he could have been a criminal, no problem. And he knows that perfectly well. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that as a slur on his character, partly because I believe the Nietzschean dictum that a lot of morality is just cowardice. Whatever he might be, he's not a coward. Right. And so, and just because you obey the laws doesn't mean you're moral. It just might mean you're afraid. In any case, so the question is, well, what socialized this brute? Well, he was taught in the Navy SEALs. Yeah. Take care of your team. That's your fundamental purpose. And he noted, and we had a long discussion about this, the successful guys, man, they've got your back. Wow. Right? You know that above all. Yeah, and if you aspire to a leadership position among those brutes, let's say, and you aren't someone they know to have your back, they're not following.
You're not going to make it, yeah.
You're not going to make it. And so this is why the discussions of power that are so prevalent in modern culture bother me so much. It's like, you think male hierarchies are predicated on power? You really think that? They are when they've gone rotten. But when they're not rotten, that's not what they're predicated on at all. The capacity to exercise power, that's really important. You need that. It has to be part of you for you to be admirable. It's like you could be a badass son of a bitch. Yes, I see that. And that way I'm somewhat intimidated by you. And that's actually a testament to your moral virtue, that you have enough force and power to be intimidating. But then if you can encapsulate that and take that potential for power and harness it to this broader good, well, that's unstoppable. And it's a critique in some sense also of the idea of the patriarchy. I know, because the patriarchy is this dominant, oppressive hierarchy that everyone's embedded in. And, you know, the social constructionist, social justice warrior, postmodernist types think about that as a social construction. It's like, how about no? That's just wrong. Lobsters have hierarchies. That's 1/3 of a billion years ago. Okay, that's not a social construction. It's part of being itself. And if you only see a hierarchy as power and tyranny, then you're looking at the world wrong. Like, it's true that hierarchies can be tyrannical and dominant. And a degenerated hierarchy is nothing but tyranny. But in a functional society, the hierarchy is actually the structure of the society, and you're actually protected within it. Well, then how you relate to that hierarchy is very important, but that's part of personal development. That's part of standing upright, you know. And then people in the hierarchy think, oh, well, you're someone who could do good things for the hierarchy. Let's promote you. Yeah. You know, like, men don't struggle for power. That isn't what men do. Not if they're civilized. They size each other up and elect the competent to lead them. And they do that at every level of society. Like, I tell a story in there about, might be later in another chapter, it doesn't matter. I worked in a rail crew in southern Saskatchewan. They're rough guys, like a lot of them had been in prison, you know. And when you first came onto the rail crew, you got a stupid nickname and people teased you. And I remember this one kid called Lunch Bucket. That was his nickname because he came to the rail crew with a lunch bucket that looked like his mom had packed it. That was a bad idea. You bring your damn lunch in kind of a, you know, ratty paper bag. Right. You don't make too big a thing out of it.
And it's dirty and smelly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like you're not pronouncing your status with your lunch bucket.
You don't have a Barbie lunchbox.
Exactly, yes. So they named him Lunch Bucket, which he wasn't very happy about. Well, that was a mistake. He should have taken it with a smile. And then he was always peevish and irritable. And if you asked him to do something, he'd whine. And so, like, This was soon after I joined the rail crew. Well, soon, there's about 60 men on this crew. It stretched out about a quarter of a mile down the tracks. Soon, anonymous harassers were throwing pebbles at him during work. We had hard hats on, so the game was, let's see if we can hit a lunch bucket in the hard hat with a pebble. Because
Anonymous.
Yeah, well, because you don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And that was purposeful because he couldn't take a joke. It's like, well, let's see if he can take this joke. Clunk, and everybody go, you know. And then it just got more and more peevish, and the pebbles got bigger and bigger. And, you know, a week later, lunch bucket was gone, having not learned anything from the experience. But, you know, the men were testing him out. It's like, can you take a joke? Can you be useful? Can you at least be amusing? Like, is there something worthwhile about you? It's like, no. It's like, okay, well then you're out of here, because you never know when we actually might need to depend on you.
The nicknames that are in the SEAL teams, like, I can't with good conscience repeat them.
I'm sure that's
because
true.
they're just horrible names. Yeah. But there's a camaraderie around that, and there's also as I was reading what you had written about these guys working on a railway
crew. Yeah.
There's a test. It's a test. Yeah. It's a test to see where you're at.
That's
what
right.
you're made of.
That's right. Can we rely on you? Can you tolerate a little bit of irritation? If the answer to that is no, it's like, well, maybe we don't want you around then, because some irritating things are likely to come down the pipe.
Yeah, and it's not just to me it proves if you've got someone that can take it, right? It's not just that they can take some random joking insults. Like they can take it. They can take it.
Yeah, that's what you're testing for. It's like, can you take it? Lunch bucket couldn't, right? Because people would laugh at his lunch bucket and he'd get all upset. It's like, well, you have a stupid lunch bucket. It's like, you know, your mom packed it. How about it? You laugh at yourself. Yeah, my mom packed this. I know it's kind of stupid. That would have been the end of it. He would have just had to say that.
Yeah.
It's like, but I didn't want to hurt her feelings. It's like, oh, okay, you know, fine. You got your stupid lunch bucket. But no, he couldn't handle that. You know, so yeah, it was horrible and comical to watch at the same time, because the level of, and people have written me about that, and they said, oh, you know, poor lunch bucket. It's like, because they're all compassionate. I think, no, not poor lunch bucket. It's like, clue the hell in, buddy. You had your chance. You know, that was a desirable job, that rail crew job in the summer, because it was high paying, you know, and they weren't easy to come by, those jobs. And so the fact that he got hired onto that crew was a real opportunity for him. You could make a pile of money in the summer at working on the rail crew. And all you had to do was take some ribbing with good grace, not suck up to the management too badly, and not have other people do your job. That was all. That was all you had to do. But he couldn't do that, and so he got run off. And it was like, grow the hell up, buddy. You know, these guys, when 100 people are teasing you, then probably they're not wrong.
Yeah, when you are getting teased like that as well, when you stop reacting, it's no longer fun.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, it also gives you an opportunity to tease back. It's like, because you can show your wit. And one of the things that working class guys in particular, which is one of the things I really loved about working class jobs, is they're always looking for some humor. So it's like, if person A is teasing person B, that's kind of comical. But if person B comes back with a good comeback, it's like, that's even better, you know? So I think that's a lot of how those jobs are rendered tolerable, right? They're hard, dirty jobs. Right. Dishwasher's a good example of that. It's not dangerous. Although cooking is, you know, you got to watch your step. I got burned a lot when I was cooking. But what makes those jobs not only tolerable, but even desirable, is that you can develop a tremendous amount of camaraderie around them. I've never really experienced that at a professional level job. That just doesn't happen the same way. And there's a real loss in that. So it's fun to be part of a team that's doing, you know, grubby, hands-on things and having a ridiculously entertaining, vicious, cruel, and evil time while you're doing it. That's very entertaining. I had an experience with that about 3 years ago. I put my videos up online, and people kept saying that I sounded like Kermit. And I thought, well, one person said it, and I thought, well, whatever. But then like 5 people said it, and I thought, oh my God, like this Kermit thing. So then I went and listened to Kermit, and I thought, oh no, it's like really, I really sound like Kermit, you know. And so then, well, then I started to play with it a little bit. I used the puppet, and when I went to speak to university students, and I made frog jokes, and then I made a couple of videos that sort of featured me as a frog, and I mean it's crazy, right? It's ridiculous, but the teasing never got mean because of that,
Yeah.
And the same things happened online to a larger degree as people keep making memes of me. And there's lots of them. There's way too many to even keep track of. And I was watching that happen, and I thought, okay, this is a good thing because there's humor, and wherever there's humor, that's a good thing. And they're making fun of me, but it's gentle. Most of it was pokey, well, you sound like this damn puppet. What do you think of that? It's like, well, if I had to pick someone to sound like, it probably wouldn't be a puppet. But if it had to be a puppet, Kermit's not a bad one. It could be a lot worse. It could be Miss Piggy. That could have been that, so thank God that didn't happen. But the memes have never got vicious because, I'll post them if they're funny and satirical, and then they won't get vicious because they don't have to. It's like, can we poke fun at you? It's like, yeah, please do. And the more the better, really, because that'll also help keep my feet on the ground and keep me awake. And plus it's funny. And one of the things about life is that a sense of humor, that's a good thing to arm yourself with, because sometimes you just don't have anything other than that. If you're going to face a threat, if you face it voluntarily, what happens is your body activates itself for exploration and mastery. But if you face it involuntarily, same size threat, then you revert to prey mode, and you're frozen, and that's way, way, way more stressful. It's way harder on your body, and so it's better to keep your eye open and watch for emergent threats, because you all know, what you're not doing quite right and where your life is likely to unravel. You all have a sense of that, and the best thing to do is to not ignore that, to pay attention to it, to watch it, and to take corrective action early, and then, you stay on top of things, and your little trip to the underworld might be a few minutes long instead of a catastrophe that produces post-traumatic stress disorder, knocks you out for 4 or 5 years, and maybe you never recover. So, and that's what these kind of symbolic representations mean. Those are states of being that indicate being devoured, and you can be devoured by your own unconscious. Jesus, that happens all the time. What does that mean? Well, and it's an autonomous thing in some sense, like if you get depressed or if you get really anxious, you don't have any control over that. It's like it sweeps up over you and pulls you down. Why down? Well, down is where you go when you're sad. You don't go up. Man, I'm up today. Oh, that's too bad. No, it's man, I'm down today. And well, that's partly this, and it's partly because this is subordinate, and it's partly because down is closer to the ground and farther from the sky. There's all sorts of reasons you're feeling down rather than up. Up is where you're aiming, right? You aim up, you don't aim down.
What tips would you give a highly emotional person to become more rational and level-headed?
Oh, well, it depends. There's a variety of... The first thing I would do if you're highly emotional, volatile, fly off the handle, a lot of mood variation, a lot of negative emotion, the first thing you might want to think about is whether or not there's actually something wrong with you, physically. You might be ill, because illness can do that to people, and so you should go get yourself checked out. You might have an inflammatory condition or something like that. And the next thing I would check out is are you sure you're not hungry? I'm dead serious about this. I mean, with many of my clients who've been anxious, a lot of them, they come in and say, I'm so anxious. I had this one client, she'd come in and she'd say, God, I'm so dead at the end of the day. I'm just wiped out. I've got no energy at all. All I can do is lay down. She was 24. All I can do is lay down and watch the same movie I watched the night before. Is that normal? It's well, no. It's not. So, and I knew this. I said, well, what do you eat? And she said, well, I usually don't have any breakfast. And then I have a little bowl of rice for lunch, and I usually have something like that for dinner. And I thought, you live on 2 balls of rice a day, And you're wondering why, when you come home at night after a full day's work, you don't have any energy. I said, well, have you considered the possibility that you're starving to death? So, we talked about this. I said, you can't live like that. That's not going to work. How about let's try this for a week? You do this with therapy. You do experiments if you're a behavioral therapist. It's like, you got to come to an agreement with the person. It's like, look, is there some other things you'd eat other than rice? Like 4 other things. It's like, we agreed. Maybe she'd eat an egg or something. It's like, or I think it was eggs. And I don't remember what it was. There was a few other things. I said, okay, look, here's what you do. Get up in the morning and have 2 eggs. You don't have to enjoy them. Because people say, well, I'm not hungry. It's like, why is that relevant? That's not the issue here. It isn't like gourmet time. It's not starving to death time. So eat your 2 eggs and maybe in 3 months you'll enjoy it. Until then it'll be like chewing down rubbery cardboard, but it's not that big a deal. So, we upped her caloric intake by a factor of about 4, and she came back, and it was like, I think she came back 2 more times. It's like, oh, I have lots of energy now. It's like, oh, good, you're not dying of starvation. It's like, and I'm telling you, like, if you're a volatile person, try this. Eat a high-protein, high-fat meal in the morning. No sugar. And a big one. Like, have a steak. Have something solid. And doesn't matter if you like it. Who cares? Cook it the night before if you don't want to cook it then. Just try it for a week and see what happens. My suspicions, I've had half my clients, I would say, have dropped their volatility levels 50% by eating a high-fat, high-protein breakfast. And then also notice that if you are crabby, and volatile and touchy and you can't get along with anyone, go eat something. Like have 2 teaspoons of peanut butter and wait 10 minutes and see if you're still a witch. So for some people, and if you are a volatile person, like your blood sugar levels tend to move up and down more because you stress yourself out more. For some people, that really matters. And so, look, try it for a week. It's nothing, right? And you might think, oh, God, what you'll find, if it works, is, A, you don't get nearly as upset about the things that used to upset you. So, and that'll be a shock. You'll think, oh my God, I would have flown off the handle because of that before, and now it's hardly bothering me. So that's a lovely thing. And then the second thing is, if something bothers you, you'll recover way faster. And so that's a good start. And so try that. That's no harm. It's not going to hurt you. Try getting up at the same time every day. That's really important. If your sleep-wake cycle is not regular and you're a volatile person, say biochemically, genetically, having a sleep-wake cycle that's dysregulated is going to be very hard on you. So it doesn't matter quite as much when you go to bed, although it would be good to regularize that too, but at least pick a time. You can pick whatever time you want. Like I would recommend like 8 o'clock or 7:30 because that's what normal people do. And unless you have a really good reason not to be a normal person, you should start by trying to be a normal person if you're being an abnormal person. So try to get up at the same time and try that. You can combine that with eating and see, like my suspicions are 50% improvement virtually immediately with that. And then if that doesn't work, well, then there are more serious things that you can consider. Being checked out by an MD and making sure you're okay. You might want to go talk to a therapist. I have this program online I mentioned. The other thing you could try is go online. I have this program called Future Authoring. You could do the past authoring program and bring yourself up to date, but Future Authoring is a program that helps you make a plan for your life. And what do you want from your friends, your family, your career, your education? How are you going to take care of yourself mentally and physically? Where would you like to be in 3 to 5 years? How are you going to regulate temptation, drug and alcohol use, and that sort of thing? Keep yourself out of trouble. And how are you going to stop yourself from deteriorating to where you could deteriorate if you weren't careful? You can do a credible job of the program in an hour and a half. It's proved very useful for people. Maybe you're kind of aimless and you need a plan. That's another possibility. But don't live with it. There's lots of things you can try. Sleep. That might be number 1. Food, that's number 2. Number 3, talk to someone, a professional, if it's really out of hand. Because what do you want to do? You want to suffer terribly for the next 10 years? And plus, if you do have a lot of excess negative emotion, it's really hard on you psychophysiologically because you produce a lot of stress hormones, and that makes you old. So it's dangerous physically as well. So, and it's hard on your brain. So if you can get it fixed, fix it. And if it has to be medication, then look, man, you're going to be taking medication at some point in your damn life, because you're going to get sick. And my observation of people has been that, everybody gets sick. And then what happens? Well, this is eliminating random luck. Some people get sick, and then they do everything they can to not be sick, including taking medication, doing whatever they have to, and some of them get better. And others they don't deal with it. And usually they don't get better. So you swallow your pride and you think, oh yeah, I should be able to handle my problems myself. It's like, yeah, well, maybe you should. But maybe, if you're really depressed and you don't take an SSRI, then one day you jump off a building, and that's pretty much the end of you helping yourself. And so, you can take the drug, hopefully it'll help you out. You can get your life back in order if you're fortunate. Then you can go off it. You can taper off it. They're relatively harmless. Weight gain's a problem. Some suppression of sexual function, that's a problem. So they're not without risk, but neither is anything else. So those are relatively straightforward things that you can do that have a high probability of working. Someone else's comment is unlikely to bring you to a halt unless you value that comment. So imagine you're going to pursue a goal, but you're full of doubts. Mm-hmm. And so 40% of you is doubts and 60% of you is pursuing the goal. And then 5 or 6 people object, and they object using the doubts. Mm. Well, that's going to be really hard on you.
So how do we overcome the self-doubt?
Well, partly what that means is you probably haven't thought it through completely. Like, what are you doing and why? And if you have a bunch of doubts and they haven't been addressed, then you're vulnerable at that point. And it may be that your goal is not everything it could be. And it may be that your strategy isn't fully fleshed out. And so you have to have a conversation with your doubts and take them seriously and see if you can construct a goal that you're on board with. And then a doubt pops up because someone criticizes you and triggers a doubt, and you look at the doubt and you think, okay, here's the doubt, and this is why what I'm doing, maybe won't work. But then you think, but I've thought this through, and I've thought this through, and I've thought this through, and that all works. And so, no, that isn't going to stop me. So I look and I think, well, I'm writing something. Why? Well, I want to figure out this problem. I want to think about this problem. Why? Well, it's an engaging problem, but it's a problem that many people seem to have, so that discussing it and figuring it out seems to be useful. Why? Well, because the more of us who take problems seriously and try to address them and communicate about them, the fewer problems we might have, and the less suffering there'll be. And suffering doesn't seem to be a good thing, unnecessary suffering. Maybe we could work towards it, and maybe that's what I should be doing, and that seems to be what's ethical, and that's it. And you might say, well, what if you doubt that doing what's ethical is right? Well, it's not that easy to construct an argument that supports the idea that having more unnecessary suffering in the world is good. Mm-hmm. So I would say, you want to put yourself on firm moral foundations. And people talk about morality all the time. This is what you should do, or you're a bad person. It's arbitrary. You know, it's got this ring of patriarchal tyranny. But that's based on a misapprehension of what morality is. It's like, do you want to be tortured by your conscience? Like, how pleasant do you find it to be tortured by your conscience?
It's horrible.
How horrible? Like, is there anything worse?
Excruciating. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything worse. I mean,
it's up there.
You got to live with it, yeah, for as long as you have it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a universal experience, or near universal experience. So you live ethically when you're not violating your conscience.
Right.
Well, there isn't anything better than that. That might not be good enough. It might not even be good. Like, let's say you manage it. Things can still come along and take you out sideways. But the purpose of living ethically is so that you have some peace. Look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. So now you think, well, let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you like, there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe a little order there would be a good thing, and there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix. And I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, this easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. If something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then, hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that. So you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbled towards you and, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair, doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain of competence. But most of the time, if people look at their lives, it's a very interesting thing to do. I like the idea of the room, because you can do that at the drop of a hat. You go back to where you live and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this place better for half an hour. What should I do? And you have to ask, and things will just pop up like mad. And it's partly because
Your mind is a very strange thing. As soon as you give it an aim, a genuine aim, it'll reconfigure the world in keeping with that aim. That's actually how you see to begin with. And so if you set it a task, especially, you have to be genuine about it, which is why you have to bring your thoughts and emotions together, and then you have to get them in your body so you're acting consistently. You have to be genuine about the aim, but once you aim, the world will reconfigure itself around that aim, which is very strange. And that, man, if you can get one thing through your head as a consequence of even being in university, that would be a good one. You see what you aim at. And so, because one inference you might draw from that is, be careful what you aim at, right? What you aim at determines the way the world manifests itself to you. And so if the world is manifesting itself in a very negative way, one thing to ask is, are you aiming at the right thing? Now, you know, I'm not trying to reduce everybody's problems to an improper aim. People get cut off at the knees for all sorts of reasons. You know, they get sick, they have accidents. There's a random element to being, that's for sure. And so you don't want to take anything, even that particular phrase, too far. You want to bind it with the fact that random things do happen to people, but it's still a great thing to ask.
So the first thing I would say is that if you feel insecure and less and ashamed and all of that, that you have to take stock. And look, I have an exercise online at selfauthoring.com. There's 3 exercises there. One helps you write about the past, one about the present, and one about the future. The present authoring program helps you assess your faults and your virtues. Okay, well, if you have some faults and you feel insecure and inferior because of that, well, you should. Now, it shouldn't be so much that you're crippled by it and unable to take action. You shouldn't be beating yourself into the ground because you're not everything you could be, because no one is. And if you beat yourself into the ground, then you can't get up and improve. But you have to differentiate. It's like, okay, to what degree am I being hard on myself, counterproductively critical, hearing the voice of my too harsh and angry father in my head, right. Adopting inappropriate stereotypical representations of masculine competence? How much of my self-criticism is ill-advised? Fair enough. And you want to deal with yourself with a certain amount of care. But then along with that, there's the, well, fix your weaknesses. You know, if you're ashamed of being ignorant, you're showing up at a party because, you know, you claim to knowledge that you don't have and someone exposes you. Well, you can be angry at them, and you probably will, but they've actually done you a favor. They pointed out an inadequacy is a pathway that you can travel down, right? A recognized inadequacy is, as soon it's such a gift in some sense, if it's accurate. Because you think, well, what should I do? What should I do with my life? That's a real complicated question. Oh, here's an inadequacy. Excellent. You have a goal now. Rectify it. Now, you still have to think strategically and figure out how to rectify it and do it step by step. But Carl Rogers, the psychotherapist, pointed out that the person, for therapy to be successful, the person has to want to change. So they have to have recognized that they have a problem. If someone is mandated by the court to attend therapy, it's very difficult for the therapist to convince them that they have a problem. Once you're convinced you have a problem, it's like, away you go. You know, I know it's still technically difficult. It requires discipline and all of that. There's no magic solution. But if you're plagued by feelings of inferiority, you should rectify the most obvious inferiorities. Right.
focus on those first over optimizing strengths, would you say?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And you don't have to redress I'm a terrible jazz musician.
Right.
You know,
it's not a thing where you hold shame around or like.
Well, it's not an impediment.
Yeah.
I would say that you have to rectify an inadequacy when it's clearly an impediment to your goal, or you have to shift goals. But if you're shifting goals because of an inadequacy-related impediment, then you have to ask yourself, is your desire to shift the goal reliable, or are you just taking the easy way out?
Right.
You can protect yourself by picking a different goal that's more difficult. That's a good mental hygiene practice, because sometimes you should switch goals rather than rectifying inadequacies. But you can fool yourself then, and that's not good.
And if someone is goalless, lazy, unmotivated, not sure what they want to do, what would be a few key steps to get started to turn their life around, or to find the motivation for something greater than where they're at?
Well, I think a fair bit of that's probably to be found you can find it in shame. You can find it in guilt. You can find it in conscience. You can find it in anger. You can find it in interest and engagement and beauty. There's lots of pathways. If you're angry about something in the world, well, you know, that's an indication that that's in some sense your problem, right? It's speaking to you in a moral sense. This shouldn't be that way. Well, maybe you're the person who should do something about it in some manner. Maybe it'll take your whole life to figure out how to do that. But it's bothering you for a reason. So the negative emotions can be a pathway to transformation. I'm not trying to romanticize them. They can crush you completely and leave you with nothing, right? For sure. And they can go badly astray. But shame, that's a good one. What am I ashamed of? Well, can you fix any of that? Because you might ask yourself, let's say you're so ashamed and so crushed that you're nihilistic and you can't see any hope for life. You're just done. You might think, well, what if I was less ashamed? Like, I'm not going to jump off the bridge today. I'm going to wait a year. I'm going to work on these things that I'm ashamed of. And just see, like, does my life improve enough so that I'm not so bitter about it now, or I'm not so hopeless about it now? And my experience has generally been that works. It works. And then some of it's practical knowledge too. It's like you can get a really long way with very small changes, incremental changes, micro habit changes. So aim low.
Don't have big goals or big transformations.
Well, you can, but the problem with a big goal is that it's daunting enough so that it might paralyze you, and there's a high probability of failure. And so imagine that you're your own child. Okay, now imagine you love this child, and you would like him, we'll say him because it's you and I talking, to succeed. Now, you have an ideal for this child. You'd like him to grow up to be the best he can be, better than you, the best man he can be. That's what you want for your son, if the good part of you is talking. You definitely want him to be better than you are, but you want him to be the best he could be if your vision is unclouded. Okay, but then you offer him a goal. It's like, well, do this. Well, can he do it? Well, if he can do it without a second's thought, there's no challenge in it. There's no developmental impetus. It's not in the zone of proximal development. You want a goal that you can do, but that requires some improvement on your part. Because you want to attain the goal, that's satisfying, but then you want to make yourself into the thing that can attain goals. And so you want to push yourself. You want to push yourself a bit farther. Yes. And there's an ample psychological literature that suggests that that's where maximal motivation is to be found.
Interesting.
So you're pursuing a goal, but you're also pursuing the goal of transforming yourself at the same time. You're doing both of those at the same time.
Do you need to know that you're transforming yourself in order to attain the goal? Or do most people just think, I got to take these steps to make it happen, but they don't realize they're becoming better human beings.
It depends on what you mean by realize. They have the sense of satisfaction and confidence that would indicate that, although they might not be able to make what that means explicit. But I would say it would be better to make it explicit. It adds one other dimension of possible motivation.
What would you say would be your 3 truths?
I would say have the faith, strive to manifest the faith necessary to make things better rather than worse. Pray that you have enough terror to be frightened out of your own deceit. And strive to be grateful regardless. That would be that's good enough. Oh yes, I mean alcohol is a very bad drug for violence. 50% of people who are murdered are drunk, and 50% of the people who murder them are drunk. And that's true for almost every violent crime. In fact, if you eliminated alcohol, you'd eliminate most interpersonal violence.
Look, I find that this is kind of an interesting topic because I think it's interesting that alcohol is legal. Mm-hmm. And yet, you know, you do terrible things sometimes. You probably couldn't have made any a worse drug legal. Right.
From an epidemiological perspective.
On the other hand, you have marijuana or psilocybin or LSD even, or some of these other drugs, and they make you thirsty, make you laugh, and you wake up feeling fine. I find it really fascinating that alcohol is the illegal one. How did that ever happen or is the legal one? Why does our system
I think
work?
it probably happened because it was so easy to make and it was just everywhere. Right? Because all you really have to do is put barley in water and you get beer. Right? So it was really easy to make, and at least in many societies, it's been around for a very long time. And so it became legal just because, well, back in the Middle Ages, people drank alcohol, not water, because all the water was polluted.
Right.
So that's the reason, but it certainly wasn't a consequence of evaluating the drugs by their comparative risk and rank ordering them and making, the least harmful legal. It wasn't that at all, because alcohol is unbelievably dangerous. I mean, about 10% of people become addicted to it one way or another.
Really?
And far more people than that abuse it. Yes, at least once in their life, yes. Yeah. It's really bad. I studied alcohol for years. It was my subject of my PhD.
We were interested in what factors made alcoholism hereditary, because it does seem to have a strong hereditary component. And what we basically concluded after doing a tremendous amount of research was that people who are prone to alcoholism, at least one type of person who's prone to one type of alcoholism, got a very, very powerful stimulant effect from the alcohol during the time that their blood alcohol level was ascending in the 10 or 15 minutes after they took a drink, especially if they took a large drink fast or multiple large drinks fast. You can probably tell, by the way, if you're one of these people, if you want to go do this in the bar the next time you go on an empty stomach, take your pulse, write it down, drink 3 or 4 shots fast, wait 10 minutes, take your pulse again. If it's gone up 10 or 15 beats a minute, look out, because that means alcohol is working as a psychomotor stimulant for you. And we found that for many of these people, that was an opiate effect. What seemed to happen was that when they drank alcohol fast, they produced probably beta endorphin, although we were never sure. It can be blocked with naltrexone, which is an opiate antagonist. Anyways, the other characteristic of that pattern of alcohol consumption is that the real kick only occurs when you're on the ascending limb of the blood alcohol curve. So, you know, first of all, your blood alcohol goes up, and then it goes down. And generally, when it goes down, it's not pleasant. That's when you start to feel hungover. And a hangover is actually alcohol withdrawal, by the way. So it's like heroin withdrawal, except it's alcohol withdrawal. And it's generally not pleasant for people, so they usually sleep through it, or it puts them to sleep. But if you're one of these people who get a real kick on the ascending limb of the blood alcohol curve, then you can just keep pounding back the alcohol, and it'll keep hitting you and keep you in that position where you're, you know, on the ascending part of the blood alcohol curve. And you can probably tell if you're one of these people if you can't stop once you get started. You know, so if it's like you have 4 drinks quick, and it's like, man, you're gone until the alcohol runs out, or till it's 4 in the morning, or till you've spent all your money, or you've been at the last bar in town, or that you're sitting on your friend's bed after everybody's gone home from the party. Still drinking, you might suspect that you're one of those people. And if you are one of those people, well, then you should watch the hell out, because alcohol is a vicious drug, and it gets people in its grasp hard, and it's hard for them to escape once they do.
They don't have a value hierarchy. So Pleasure Island, it's a good example. Those kids that were brought there were lost. So they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have an identity. So they default to local pleasure. And that's better than none. Although the problem with local pleasure, well, as the narrative made clear, is that you better look out if you're impulsive, because it's going to kick back on you hard. And the reason is, you're only considering the immediate time frame. And the problem is that things propagate across all the time frames. And so just because something works really well this second, cocaine, for example, doesn't mean that it's a tenable solution to the class of all problems. So usually, often, people pursue local pleasure because that's the best they can imagine. It's the best they've been taught. They don't see another alternative. So it could be ignorance. It can be they don't want to adopt the responsibility, because part of the problem with working at every level of the hierarchy simultaneously is that it's like dancing to a very complex waltz, let's say. You have to be paying attention to a very large number of things simultaneously and doing things right. It requires responsibility. And so, you know, it's a pain. It's a weight. Part of the reason people drink alcohol is to get rid of their responsibility. I mean, that's, you know, you hear people drink because they have problems. It's like, yeah, no. Some people drink because they're anxious, and alcoholics drink because they're in withdrawal. But young people drink because they're sick and tired of being responsible, because it's annoying. It's like, so I'll drink enough, I won't care about the medium to long-term consequences, because alcohol, that's exactly what alcohol does. It doesn't make you ignorant of the medium to long-term consequences, but it makes you not care about them. And partly it's because it dampens anxiety. So it dampens anxiety, leaves your positive emotion circuits intact, so then you can go out there and do stupid, fun things. And that's a party, really. Let's go do stupid, fun things. That's a party. But the medium to long-term consequences it's risky. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's risky. So, yeah, they don't know better. That's the answer, I would say. Like, make a plan. I would say do the future authoring program, you know, because it isn't that you're trying to avoid booze exactly. It's that you're trying to restructure your whole life, you know, because if you're a drinker, then all your friends are drinkers, and you're used to drinking in every social situation, and the places that you go to socialize are places that you drink, and like, it's really built in as a whole set of habits. And so what you have to do is kind of redesign your life, and you have to think of things. You can't just stop drinking. You have to figure out what you're going to start doing instead of drinking. There's a hole that you have to fill in. And, you know, the future authoring program will also help you figure out what your life could look like in the absence of alcohol, and what kind of hell you could end up in if you keep drinking and it causes all the problems that it can cause. And I think you really need to, you need to think through the hell that can occur, and you have to think through how your life could be valuable without alcohol, so that you can be motivated enough to try to regulate it. And I would also say, if you fail and slip, don't berate yourself and beat yourself up. Just start quitting again, because, you know, if you could cut your alcohol intake down 75%, that's a hell of a lot better than zero. And often people go all or nothing, just like they do when they're quitting cigarettes. And, you know, they'll quit for a month and then have a cigarette and they'll say, oh my God, now I've broken the pact, and then they'll smoke a whole pack and they'll be smoking again. You don't have to do that. You can just decide that you slipped and that you're going to get back on the wagon again. And, you know, it can take a long time, but I do believe that you need a better vision of life, right? You have to find something to do that's better than alcohol. And that might take some real consideration, especially if alcohol is a very potent drug for you. And I would also say, don't hesitate to try the naltrexone. It's got a pretty decent clinical history, and it's basically harmless. What's the best way to stop drinking alcohol and start doing my best in my psychology degree? It's affecting my study, but I can do very well if I stop. I'm 26. Well, Paul, what I would say is, I think you should do the future authoring program, and you should really concentrate. There's a section in it that helps you determine what your positive view of your future would be, but another section that helps you determine what would happen in your life if your negative habits got out of control. And one of the things that can really help you control your alcohol intake is to really, really think through what you're giving up and where you could be in 5 years if you don't get it under control. And a proclivity to alcoholism can be a really vicious thing. You know, lots of people get dragged down into the mud by alcohol, excess alcohol intake, especially if they're sensitive to the opiate response that alcohol can produce. And you can tell that when you drink, you know, you get alert and let's say more enthusiastic and energetic, and then you don't want to stop drinking. That's definitely a bad sign with regards to developing alcoholism. So I would say you need to figure out something that's more important to you than drinking. Think through very hard the negative consequences of continuing it. You're at about the age, 26, where you should stop. I mean, guys who are going to stop generally start to slow down pretty intensely around that age. You know, also treating your psychology studying as a full-time job can also be helpful. So, you know, get up at 8 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning and start hitting the books by 9, and put in a 6 to 8 hour day. And then even if you do keep drinking, at least you're moving forward. So that's what I would say about that.